Hey everyone, I'm Max Lyons, and you're watching smartandrelentless.com. I was 18 years old, never grew up in a Christian home. Well, I was always curious about Jesus, but never really didn't have a lot of experience with it. And then a friend invited me along to a youth camp when I was 18. And while I was there, someone spoke about Jesus in a way that I'd never heard about before. I always thought Jesus was a list of rules. You had to do this, do this, do this. If you could be good enough, then maybe you could get to God. And someone talked about Jesus as a God who loved me, who wanted me just as I am. I didn't have to do anything to get to him because he did everything for me. And it was just one of those moments where it really felt the presence of God, something I'd never felt before. And in that moment, decided that if God is real, I'm in. So when I first decided to follow Jesus, I started reading the Gospels, and I think that's always a good place to start. Hearing what Jesus did, how he lived, what the words that he said. I think also very very important was the fact that I had people who would read it with me, who were further along the journey, because a lot of the stories I read them and I had no context, no understanding, never grew up in church, wasn't in Sunday school, and so I think having someone around me who was a bit further along to be able to read it with me and answer questions, because I had so many questions about what Jesus did and why did he do it that way, and what exactly is going on here, and to have people who could answer that was unbelievably helpful. So I graduated from university at the University of Washington in Seattle and moved out to New York City to take a job with Accenture as a consultant. And the couple years I was at Accenture, it was an incredible experience. I learned so much, and it was unbelievable learning experience. And to be in New York and to work at the companies I got to work at was again, it was such a steep learning curve, and I felt like I got to learn quite a bit. The the interesting thing about the corporate world is it can be a very lonely place, and it can be a very difficult place to work. Lots of hours, lots of travel, and so it's one of those things where it's a very very unique place to be. And so I think I tried to learn for a couple years how exactly do I live that out and what does that look like. And at about that time, I got a lot more involved in church on a Sunday, and it was almost like every Sunday I got more and more passionate about the church side of things, the pastoral side, the ministry side, and then every day I got a little bit less passionate about the consulting. So it was very intellectually stimulating, but it was almost as if my passion started shifting from more from the corporate world to building church. I think I always had a passion for church ministry, but I think I never felt like I was good enough. I never felt like I was holy enough or spiritual enough, or I hadn't been a Christian since I was a kid. I became a Christian, at 18, and so I don't know. I kind of felt like I wasn't good enough, and I think I came up probably with a lot of stupid excuses. But I went out to Bible college for 2 years in Australia. Had the most unbelievable time. Learned so much. Grew so much in my faith. And after that 2 years, again, still thinking that I wasn't good enough to, or I wasn't good enough to be on pastoral staff at a church. I was getting ready to go back to the business world, and met our lead pastor here in London, who met him a couple times. Ended up inviting me to come out and work for church here in London, and I think that was kind of the shift, because I think it wasn't me pushing it because I never felt like I was good enough to do it. It was more kind of God bringing along the right opportunities at the right time. There's been a misconception about ministry, and it's dated back to Martin Luther or before that. I mean, he even wrote letters to the German nobility, to the Christian nobility of the German nation, saying that there's no difference between holy work and secular work, and that anybody who is a Christian is basically in full-time ministry, is kind of what he's getting at. And I think even in modern day context, I think we've completely misunderstood what it means to be a Christian in the workplace. Because so many, even when I was at Accenture, I thought I make money and I give money, and that's me funding ministry, and there's a pastor who's doing the holy work. But I think when I was at Accenture, I think my understanding couldn't have been more wrong. That anyone who is a Christian is in full-time ministry, regardless of the industry they're in. And even the scriptures talk about our job is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So it's not our job, even if you're on staff at a church, your job is not to do all the ministry. It's to equip the people to be able to do the ministry themselves. And that's one of the things I've kind of taken up as my personal mission is I'm trying to get every single Christian in business to understand that whether they work in staff at a church, or they're an investment banker or a doctor or a lawyer, that they're in full-time ministry, and that God has them there for a reason, for a specific purpose, and that their work is holy, it's spiritual, it's significant. The level of excellence that we give something sort of shows our value that we place upon it. And I think a lot of times we think of work as a necessary evil. It's this thing we have to do to make money. And, if we could just get out of work, then we'd be happy. But the problem with that is that actually God himself worked, and that God created man with a job description to fill the earth, to subdue it, to till the ground, and even to name the animals. There's even mental work in there as well. And so God actually gave us work as a gift. And so if God values work, I think we should also value work as well. And I think, for so many Christians who, and even myself at different points in my life, I've seen work as a necessary evil instead of a gift from God. And I think gift itself is a work from God. It's something God gave us, and it's something that we need it to be fully human. We can't be all God wants us to be unless we're working, because God worked and designed us to work. And, I think the level of excellence we give that work reflects the value that we have upon the things of God, because God gave us work. And so if we're not going to be excellent at it, if we're not going to give value to it, then we're actually undervaluing a gift that God has given us. We've basically started a working professionals ministry. It's almost a bit of a social experiment, because I try to look around the world at what other churches, what other ministries are doing to help business people. And there's some out there, but there's not a lot. And so, we believe that whether someone works as a pastor at a church or someone works as an investment banker, that it's the same level of holiness, same level of calling. It just looks different. And that everybody who is a Christian is in full-time ministry, regardless of the industry they work in. So we've developed a bit of a social experiment to try to outwork that, and to try to help empower working professionals in their 9 to 5, in their Monday through Friday. And so we've got a couple different groups that are meeting. We've got a group of corporates that have monthly groups, monthly chapel services. We've got a group of entrepreneurs that meet once a month, trying to get groups going with that as well. We're rolling out a mentorship program. We've got other communities that are starting to meet up, not-for-profit leaders, people in politics, people in education. And so we're really trying to just empower people in whatever sphere of life they're in, because we believe that God has them in that industry for a reason, and then he wants to do something through them in that area to reflect the nature and the character of God. And so we've tried to set up as much of a community as we can to really help and empower people as they live out their ministry in their workplace. To help people develop the marketplace skills to advance in their workplace, to be able to step into really the fullness of what God has for them in their workplace, we developed a program called the Leadership Masterclass. And the very first time that the class ran, I went to the last class, and person after person got up and talked about how they'd gotten promoted because of the class. They'd gotten a new job because of the class. They'd launched their business because of the class, and in large part because of the leadership skills training, but also in large part because of the people who were around them, who helped them. And so, I think our kind of hope is that, if God is calling someone to go into a certain industry or to start a company, that we could basically do whatever we can to help them to fulfill what God has for them in that. I talk to so many people who are Christians, and they feel like God's spoken to them and given this dream to start a business or to start a not-for-profit or to do something. And I think, I see a lot of cases where people run after it and they realize it. And then I see a lot of cases where, people just kind of let it sit and never really fully engage with it. And I think probably the difference is the people who take a step and they really run after their God-given dream, is that they do it bit by bit, piece by piece. I think a lot of the people who have these massive dreams and they feel like God's called them to start a business or to do something, but they never actually action it. It's because this can be overwhelming, because there's so much going on. Whereas I think the person who breaks it down into, what am I going to do this year? What am I going to do this month? What am I going to do this week? What am I going to do today to help take a step and another step and another step, to where 1-2 years from now I'm actually able to launch my business. So I think probably the biggest advice I'd give is just breaking it down into manageable steps, having the right people around you, and really believing that it's not your power at work within you. It's the power of God. If it really was God that spoke to you, that it's God who's doing it in you. How do you live out your ministry in your workplace? It is an incredibly difficult question to get at. There's so many layers to it, because I think often we, telling people about Jesus in our workplace, unbelievably important. We should all be doing that. We should all be telling people about who Jesus is, the good news. And I think that's something every Christian should be doing. I think the second part of that is being generous and being in contributing to kingdom cause and to investing in the kingdom of God. But I think those are kind of the two things that most Christians in business focus on and stop. But that actually doesn't say anything about the work itself. So we talk about telling people about Jesus. We talk about contributing to good causes. But the work itself is actually holy. It's spiritual and it's significant. So if someone is a doctor, God is working to redeem the world, to restore it, to heal the sick. And so for someone who's a doctor, they're not just writing a prescription, they're actually helping God himself to heal the sick. And if someone is an investment banker or they work in some sort of investments, they're actually facilitating God's provision going to other people. And so I think we also need to understand work through the context that the work itself that we actually do in our day-to-day is also significant in addition to sharing the gospel and to contributing. On the point about being in ministry, whether that's for a church or whether that's for someone in the business world, I've got a really good friend of mine who spent a bit of time interning at church, and at the end of his internship, the church said, "Congratulations, we want to offer you a job in church. We want you to be a pastor. Isn't this so exciting?" And he looked back at the pastor and said, "Yeah, that's cool, but I actually don't think that's where God has me. I don't think that's the right fit. I really feel like God's calling me to go work in insurance." And I think for someone to understand that God's actually calling them to go work in insurance, I think is a significant understanding of God and what God's speaking to that person's life. And for that person, for my friend, he's become the fastest promoted managing director in the history of Willis, and his career's taken off. He's doing incredible things for the kingdom of God, and I think he's much more effective now in what he's doing at Willis than he would have been if he would have been a pastor at a church. Every day is always different. There's always something going on that day, or some initiative that's coming up that's a bit more urgent than the rest. But I think I always try to keep the same core things in my day. I think I always try to create a bit of time for planning, for strategy, to kind of sharpen the axe, as some would use terminology wise. Because I think the last thing I want to do is be so busy doing that I'm working harder and not smarter. So I always try to create a little bit of time in my day to plan, to focus, to reflect. And to be able to try to continuously improve what I've been doing. And then I think also connecting with people is huge. I always try to create space in my day to connect with the leaders who are on my team, and other people who are on the other people on our staff, other leaders in our from other churches around the area. But I always try to create time to connect with people as well. And then I think, there's always that aspect of doing, whether it's, sending emails, trying to get that kind of stuff out of the way. But again, trying to work smarter and not harder. I have a morning routine. I'm not always perfect at it, but I try to do, it more times than not, which I try to do 5 things in the morning. The first thing that I do is just a basic thing that I picked up from a book I read, which is make the bed. Very simple, very simple thing, but it actually starts your day off on a win. Because it takes 2 seconds to do. You've already got 1 win under the belt. You've already got a little bit of momentum going. Second thing I do in the morning is stretch, and just to try to keep up overall health. Stretch. The third thing I'll do is I will listen to the scriptures. I for some reason I've had a more effectiveness with audiobooks in the Bible than I have had with anything else. And it wasn't until I switched over to audiobook that I've actually been able to read the entire Bible front to back. That was would have been last year, was the first year I've really read the whole thing cover to cover, which, for someone who's a bit ADD was a pretty significant achievement for me. So I always try to get some scriptures into my life, because it's the daily bread. It's not not a once a week thing. I'm trying to, it should be an everyday thing. And beyond that, I always try to create time to write and to journal, because I think journaling is incredibly important. And often writing things out, whether it's a prayer to God or just kind of dumping the thoughts in my head out on a page. If I don't write it out, oftentimes it can kind of stay bottled up inside. Which if I get it out on a page, I can sort of understand how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that way, and then kind of get on with life. And then the other thing I try to do is I try to listen to a bit of worship music and really focus and pray, meditate, press into God, and I'm trying to spend less time talking to God and more time trying to listen and hear from God. So that's something I've been trying to work on a bit lately, but I try to create time for that every morning. How do I love Jesus more? I think it has a lot to do with quality of time, and I think quantity of time as well. So I think making sure that when I'm focusing on Jesus in my prayer life, or when I'm reading the scriptures, that I'm all there, and as much as I can be. And then I think creating that quantity of time as well. Because when I first became a Christian, I thought God was, angry, judgmental. I had to do all these things in order for Him to like me, and I was still outworking the past beliefs that I had about God before I met Jesus. And I think the longer I've known Jesus, I think the more I've realized that Jesus is actually fun, and that this life was created to be enjoyed. And there's obviously an element of laying our life down, and there's a cost that's associated with it. That's 100% for sure. But I think this life is a gift from God. It was meant to be enjoyed. It was meant to be fun. And I think as the quality of my interactions with Jesus has gotten better, as the quantity has continued over the years, I think I think Jesus is fun. I think anyone who's wanting to love Jesus more, I think it starts with being honest with where you're at. In realizing this is where I'm at, this is the place I am, because I think God meets us where we're at, and I think he always wants to kind of bring us one step further along in knowing Him and growing deeper in that relationship. And so I think it starts with being honest and being real about where we're at, and I think it ends with focusing on Him and knowing Him, and trying to understand that this dynamic in this relationship with Him, because it needs to be every relationship is an experience. If I, like my girlfriend, the reason we have the relationship is because we have experiences that we've created together. And I think, a relationship with Jesus is not all about an emotional experience, but we need to have experiences, encounters with God. And so I think that the more encounters we have, I think the more we'll find ourselves growing deeper in that relationship with Jesus. Workplace evangelism is probably one of the most difficult kind of emotional things. And even when I was at Accenture, I kind of struggled with, I've experienced this Jesus who is amazing and incredible in every way, and I want my friends around me to experience Him, but how do I articulate it? How do I explain it? And especially in a workplace context. And I think the ideal is always when someone comes and asks us about our life, because our life is different, because there's something that's remarkable that is, it's counter to the way that everyone else is living their life, and it demonstrates love and servant-heartedness, and there's something attractive about that life. And so I think when people are coming and asking us about what makes you different, I think that's always the ideal place to begin that conversation about Jesus. But I think too, I think we've also lost the art of asking great questions. And I think there's so many people I've talked to who don't know Jesus, and the more questions I ask, the more I realize they're actually really curious, and they're open. And I think it's a lot of times it's more about the questions we ask than the things we say to people. I think if we ask better questions, I think we'd see a much higher level of engagement from people wanting to hear more about Jesus. I've had a number of different spiritual encounters throughout my life, but I think probably the thing that I find the most miraculous that's happened in my life is when I meet somebody who doesn't know Jesus, but you can tell there's a genuine level of curiosity in them. And then being able to have those conversations and answer questions and just have general talk about what's the meaning of life and why are we here, and then having that person either have through conversation, or maybe they come to church with me, and then having that person themselves make a decision that they want to follow Jesus as well. I mean, I think that's the most miraculous, spiritual thing that we get to be a part of as human beings, is helping other people to hear the good news and to decide that they want to receive that for themselves as well. I almost quit Bible college. I went out to Australia. I was there for a year and a half. Was having the best time of my life. Met a great girl. Dated. Even got engaged. And then the plan was to leave Australia together. Move to New York City. And then about a year and 3 months into the relationship, decided to completely call it off, and ended up breaking off the engagement. And obviously that was a bit of a emotionally turmoil. I don't know what the word is, but there's a lot of emotional turmoil going on. But the more awkward thing was that we were in the same Bible college classes every day. So we sat in the same room for 3 to 6 months while school was finishing up. And when I got to the end of when things broke off, I decided I wanted to quit. I was about ready to book a flight home. I didn't want to be there anymore. I was about this close to basically walking away from everything. And just something inside me told me that if I quit and if I gave up, that I'd regret it for the rest of my life. And so I stuck it out for the next 3 to 6 months. And had I not done that, I never would have met the people who ended up giving me the opportunity to come out here to London. And had I not done that, I wouldn't be here today doing what I'm doing right now. And so I think that was a pretty big obstacle in my life. And I think whereas in the past, there's a lot of things I've done where I probably may have not made the right decision. But I think in that case, being able to push through and to stick it out amidst all the awkwardness and the emotions and the frustration, and now to be here doing what I'm doing, like, it's so exciting. And, yeah, it's been God always takes those things that are meant to frustrate us and destroy us and turns them into something that's actually positive and brings the best out of it. And I think he did exactly that in that situation. I mean, so many working professionals who are tired, they're frustrated, they're burnout. And I think a lot of that stems from work. But I think work can create a lot of emotional issues and even spiritual issues that pop up. I've met a lot of people who are working 80 to 100 hours a week, traveling all the time. And they're just tired, they're burnt out, and they want to walk away not just from their job, but sometimes from faith, from other things. And I think the biggest thing that helps, because I've been in that situation myself, and I think the biggest thing with that is to be honest. Because I think God's not afraid of our hard questions. He's not afraid of our honesty. And even in the Psalms, David is so brutally honest when talking with God. I think there's power in being honest and just being real and authentic before God. And I think the other thing is having good people around us. I really believe even when God created Adam, God said that man is not meant to be alone. And so God created a man. He had full interaction with God, and God still said there's something missing. Man needs someone else. And I think often we try to be, the machismo, do it all yourself type person. But I think we need other people around us. We can't be all that God wants us to be if we're by ourselves. We have to have the right people around us. And I think being involved in a local church is unbelievably important. We need to be involved in a local church, to have other Christians around us, encouraging us in our walk with Jesus. And if Jesus loves the church, if he gave everything to and he's building his church, I think we should fall in love with the church and other Christians as well. Well, I was watching a video interview the other day, and they were interviewing non-Christians on what was the first thing that came to their mind when they thought of Jesus. And the answers that came up were hate, judgment, anger, probably the exact opposite of what we would hope that Jesus would be represented as. And so I think as Christians, we have a task in front of us, which is that Jesus has been the most misrepresented, misbranded probably person in history. And even people like Hitler would actually use the Bible to justify their horrendous actions, which were completely anti the heart of God. And so I think we do have a bit of a endeavor ahead of us to rebrand Jesus, because I think probably the biggest thing as far as what our lives should reflect is love. Loving God, loving people, the most important thing that Jesus talks about. But I think so often in today's society, where it can be all about how do I promote myself, and how do I get ahead, and how do I make a name for me? I think something that's absolutely missing and it's needed is servanthood, and people who are actually going to serve and love the people around them at no benefit to themselves, not opportunism, not looking to get something, but I think people who are genuinely humble and are serving people, because Jesus came not to be served, but he came to serve. And I really hope that us as Christians, that several years from now, that when people ask, what does Jesus mean to you, and they're asking non-Christians, that they would say humble, that they would say servant-hearted, they would say loving, embracing, caring, and even like set apart, different. And I think that's kind of what I hope that Christians would be known as. When I first became a Christian, there's a book by Erwin McManus called The Barbarian Way, and that book completely revolutionized the way that I thought about Jesus and about Christianity. And so I think from a personal spiritual development and why am I here on this planet and what is the mission of God, I think that book was probably the most helpful that I've been able to read. And I think as I kind of got to understand my faith and what that means, I then started looking into more leadership books because I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to have an impact for Jesus and do as much as I can with what I have. And so the book that's probably shaped me the most in recent times is a book by John Maxwell, and it's called The Five Levels of Leadership. Because I think often we think of a leader as something that's a positional only, and John Maxwell basically takes that concept and says, yeah, position is cool, but that's where you start, and there's actually five levels of that. And if you only stop it at having a positional mindset, you're missing out, and you're never going to have the impact that you're capable of. So I think The Five Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell has been an unbelievably helpful book. I never want to forget why I do what I do, because several years ago, I didn't give my life to a person. I didn't give my life to a church. I gave my life to Jesus. And I think everything else flows out of that. And I think Jesus is always the main thing. He's always been the main thing, always will be the main thing. My hope and my prayer is that we always keep Jesus the center of everything, that he's the main thing, and that everything reflects out of that. I did write a book. It took me about 3 days to write the book. I've been sitting on it for about the last 3 years waiting to publish it because I just haven't felt like it's the right time. But I did title it. It was a bit of a controversial title. I titled it "Finding Jesus Despite Christians," and there's not meant to be any venom in that. It was solely meant to represent that I was so curious about God when I was growing up and when I was in high school and into my teenage years. I was so curious about God, but I felt like in a lot of ways, a lot of the Christians I knew actually made it more difficult for me to discover who Jesus was. And so that's why I titled it "Finding Jesus Despite Christians," because it was more of my personal journey with faith. The book is meant to two main audiences. And the first is people who are curious about Jesus. They're not Christians. And I'm hoping that maybe they can be a bit encouraged from my journey, that that they can discover something that they've always felt like was missing from their life, and to be able to discover who Jesus is. And I think the other audience is Christians, because I think as Christians we need to do the best job we possibly can at making it easy for people to hear the clear gospel, to meet Jesus. And I think it was almost like I'm almost hoping that it was a little bit of a wake up call to us as Christians, to help tell people the good news and do it in the right way, so that people can hear about Jesus. Hey everyone, great talking with you today. The last thing I want to say before we go is I really hope and I pray that God's best would come for you and your business, and whether it's a company you started, whether you work in a corporation, or any other industry. And I want to encourage you that God has you there for a reason, and that if you're in business and you're a Christian, you are in full-time ministry. And I'm excited to continue this conversation about how that exactly outworks in our day-to-day and our 9 to 5. But I hope and I pray God's best in every area of your life. So thank you. If you are a part of a church anywhere around the world and you want to start up a working professionals community, we would love to do anything we can to help you, to give you the tools to be able to do that. So reach out, let me know. My email is maxmlyons@gmail.com. And again, we want to do whatever we can to help you. And if you're a working professional, maybe you're moving to London, feel free to get in touch with me as well. We'd love to get you involved in what we're doing, and all the best.